Now let's get rolling. Now I'm not gonna lie, one hard thing is finding information about this particular unit, because it is, well, first of all, a special forces unit, and they don't like to tell a lot of the public what they are doing, so it makes finding information really tough to do. And although we're going to talk about the SOG, you should keep in mind that Sweden has had a lot of different special forces units throughout its military history. And the reason some of them are not around today is because they actually merged with the SOG, and I'm going to get into that in this video. Because first of all, let's just get a general understanding of what special forces units are actually required to do within the country. To quote off of Sweden's military website, the SOG are Special Operations Task Force Groups. They are a core unit of the special forces within Sweden, and they provide unique and unconventional capabilities to achieve a strategic goal. Also, heads up, while we're doing this video, you guys may see some footage of certain units that are not classified as special forces. Now, the reason for that is because finding actual photos on the SOG or any special forces unit is kind of a hard thing to do as well. And on top of that, some people just tag this as a special forces group, so if we find them on Google, then we're kind of stuck. So the SOG, what does it stand for? Well, they are known in English as the Special Operations Task Group. And to pronounce it in Swedish, although I'm probably going to mess this up because I know a lot of you guys in the comment section, you guys love to take the piss out on me being like, you mispronounced it wrong, but let's give it a shot. I think it's pronounced Särskilda Operationsgruppen. I think that was right. But one thing that's really important to know about the Special Forces Group is it's rather new on the block when it comes to new military units within the country. As a matter of fact, this particular Special Forces unit has only been around since 2011. It's like, well, at the time of recording this video, it's like 7 years old. Special Forces units within Sweden have actually been around for a long time, and because Sweden has a very neutral perspective on war, the country hasn't had much need for a Special Forces unit, which explains why they may seem like a little new to the game. Now, the reason this group was formed in 2011 was very similar to how Dutch Special Forces groups were formed. They were actually merged from two different units into one major unit. Now, these two groups were firstly the Special Protection Group, also known as the SSG, or Särskilda Stridsgruppen, and secondly, the Special Reconnaissance Group, known as the SIG, or Särskilda Inhämtningsgruppen. And in order for us to understand how the SOG works, we got to look at the history of these two particular units. Looking at the SSG first, this particular group became active in 1994. And although the actual number of troops is classified, they do estimate that at its height, there was anywhere between 60 to 80 actual soldiers or special forces units. And of course, within this group, the approximate age of all the soldiers were in their early 30s. Now, similar to most special forces groups, these guys were extremely secretive. And as a matter of fact, they didn't become aware to the public until about 1997. And to recruit people for this program, they took officers and notable individuals from different sections of the military. And to be in this group, it took more than 1 year of basic operator training. Soldiers would learn how to do halo dives, parachuting, scuba diving, and as well, women could apply, but only as intelligence officers. It's also interesting to know that for the training of this program, it was also held in other countries in joint operations. Of course, the SSG was also present in many different operations around the world until the merge in 2011. For example, in 2002, they were in charge of guarding the Afghan King Mohammed Zahir Shah, and in 2002, they were sent back to Zaire for what was known as Operation Artemis during the Second Congo War, which was actually the first operation led by the EU and the first autonomous EU operation. As well, they were a part of the first rapid response unit by any EU nation, and of course the first major operation outside of the EU that was conducted by the EU and with the United Nations. In 2004, the SSG was also in Kosovo, and in 2008 they were in Chad, along with other operations in Macedonia, Liberia, Lebanon, and the Bosnian War. Now let's move on to the second group, the SIG, and find out a little history about them. Now the SIG in 2007 formed out of the parachuting school. Now similar to the previous group, there's not quite an accurate number, but they do guess that there was anywhere between 50 to 70 people that were trained in this program and were in their early 30s as well. Now for this particular group, they were more heavily focused on reconnaissance than combat. Of course, Sweden has its own form of reconnaissance group known as ISTAR, but for this particular group, group, it was designed for missions that required a little bit more training as they were deemed more dangerous. For training when it came to SIG individuals, these guys would train by jumping out of C-130 Hercules, doing nighttime and daytime jumps, as well as halo jumps. But today, this group has been discontinued as of 2009, and it was reorganized into the 323rd Paratrooper Company, as well as a few other companies. And by that merge, I meant specifically the Parachuter Ranger program, not the SIG. They were merged in 2011 to create the SOG. But now let's look specifically at the SOG, because this particular unit, its size is also listed as classified. So one thing that I've heard when it comes to the SOG and who they select, I have heard this, I can't confirm it, that they only select people once in a lifetime. And it pretty much means that if you don't make the team, you are never allowed to get into it, unless of course there is some really good reasons. And to dive further into the training of the SOG, for about 6 months before individuals have their major test, they get analyzed by officials and told where they need to improve on. And during the selection process, it takes about 2 weeks, where actually 1 whole week you are gone on an entire field exercise. And of course, if these individuals are chosen to move forward into special operations training, they then qualify for a basic operator course, which takes approximately 12 months to finish. As for the SOG, they also say that they generally work in teams of 4, with usually a team leader, a demolitions expert, radio operator, and a combat medic. As well, I just want to mention when it comes to the SOG, the SIG, and the SSG, they've been a part in many operations such as the Balkans, the Congo, Chad, Central African Republic, and much more, which of course we should include Afghanistan in there as well. But as for the SOG, they have specifically been in Syria and Iraq for Operation Inherent Resolve. As well, they've been placed in the countries of Iraq and Kurdistan to train other soldiers. And for all these groups, no matter where they've come from or whether they've merged into the new group known as the SOG, their garrison and headquarters have always been located in Carlsberg, Sweden.
So the first thing, the SSG, or Special Service Group, is the main special operations task force of the Pakistan Army. While the rest of the army is well trained in regular combat situations, these SSG commandos are skilled in special skills like counterintelligence and covert operations. The headquarters are at Tarbela Cantonment and is located in the Haripur district of Pakistan. It's headed by a major general and divided into 8 battalions. Each battalion has 700 men in 4 companies, with each company split into platoons and then into 10-man teams. Each battalion is commanded by a lieutenant colonel. Now, the earlier thought process of hiring recruits was to spend as little time as possible training them. This is because in the early days after getting independence from the British, Pakistan really lacked certain resources and they had to do the best with what they had at the time. The SSG was first called the 19th Baloch and was created in 1956 after combining the 7th and 10th Baloch regiments and the 312 Garrison Company. The SSG's initial training and orientation regarding tactics was based on the US Special Forces program, with whom they cooperated closely with in the Cold War years. The SSG initially had 6 companies, and each company had specialization units specialized in desert, mountain, ranger, and underwater warfare. And later on, Chinese training, tactics, weapons, and equipment were also introduced. Now, the SSG used guerrilla tactics to fight off their enemies and use the element of surprise whenever and wherever they could. The special operations that they take part in require the fighters to be very still and very stealthy. Their first major deployment came during the Indo-Pak War of 1965, and by the year 1971, the SSG had grown to 3 battalions with 1 permanently stationed in East Pakistan. The training program has evolved over the years, where it incorporates many new elements of modern warfare, but some things have remained the same. The SSG officers must have at least 2 years of prior military experience and volunteer from other formations for 2-year assignments with the SSG. SSG. Non-commissioned officers and enlisted men volunteer from other formations to serve permanently in the SSG. All trainees must participate in a 9-month SSG course at Chirag, and physical training includes doing a 36-mile march in 24 hours. Training with the same people and the same instructor can get really tedious and also put you in danger of being obsolete, since the rest of the world is advancing with new training methods. So it's important that soldiers interact with other countries and also learn their ways of training. This is also a good way to keep the enemy tactics in mind. SSG conducts biannual exercises with the Turkish Special Forces, which have been designated as the Ataturk series, and during the 1980s and into the 1990s, the SSG held many similar training exercises with the US Special Forces. Now I'm going to briefly talk about the SSG-N. Now these guys were actually created after the SSG Army. After the Indo-Pakistan War in 1965, the Pakistani Navy, under the advice of the US Navy, decided to create its own special warfare unit. The SSG-N was born in 1966, and by the year 1967, the United States had finally lifted the embargo on Pakistan, therefore allowing the United States Navy SEALs to provide their training and operational techniques to the SSG-N. And speaking of the SSG-N, the current SSG-N headquarters are in Karachi, Sindh, and they were modeled after the American Navy SEALs and the British Special Boat Services, or the SBS. Because the US SEALs had supervisor training, the training of the SSG-N is one of the toughest training programs in the entire world. The dropout rate for the SSG-N is 80 to 90%. Now getting back to the SSG Army, so let's take a look at their uniforms. They're really distinguished by the insignia and the maroon berets with a silver metal tab on a light blue felt square with a dagger and lightning bolts. There's also a wing on the right side of the chest, and the combat uniform of the SSG is similar to the US woodland pattern camouflage coat and pants. Initially, the SSG were popular for their green berets with Baloch insignia back in the 1950s, but the SSG, they dropped their green berets and adopted the Baloch regiment's maroon berets. And the final thing I want to share about the SSG is that the SSG had been listed as the best special forces group ahead of the United States Navy SEALs and the British Special Air Service Group. Now this list was done by Business Insider Australia back in the year 2015, and it ranked them as the best of 9 top elite forces in the entire world. Now there may not necessarily be any real bearing to this ranking, however the SSG still has a lot of things going on for them that make them a very powerful force to contend with. This is also something that makes Pakistanis very proud.
As well, when it comes to the emergency response units, they are a policing force, and the ones that I am going to talk about in this video fall under the Armed Forces Special Command and are under Military Army Command. So let's get cracking, guys. Let's rock and roll. Now, the Special Commando Unit, they are the oldest special forces in the entire country. And these guys date back to even World War II, when they were a part of the Special Operations Executive, which was an operation where Norwegian forces were allied with British forces, and they together took part in an attack on the heavy water plant in Rutkin, known as Operation Gunnerslide. And for those who don't know, the reason why they attacked the heavy water plant, this was pretty much to stop the Germans from making nuclear weapons, and it was a big thing that the Allies were doing. But however, though, for the Special Operations Executive, it was under what is known as a British program. However, for Norway's own individual Special Forces unit, these guys date back to 1962, in which during that time their code sign was HFJS, which stood for Herren Fallskjermjäger Skole. Which, by the way, guys, keep your ears open for all these abbreviations, because for the HJFS, they changed their name throughout history quite a lot, and I'm going to get into that, and it gets rather confusing. But however, for the Herren Fallskjermjäger School, these guys were specialized in parachuting and were the parachuting ranger school of the entire military. And they were the first group in Norway to do what is known as a free fall jump. Of course, the actual size of these guys is rather classified, but there were reports that initially there were 20 guys a part of the program. However, this unit was not also just a parachuting school, as they specialized in reconnaissance and was classified as an Army Special Forces unit. Now, this is where it gets really confusing, because about 1971, they started to do a name change for this group, in which they shortened the abbreviation down to HJS, also known as Herrens Ranger Skole. And for this unit, these soldiers focused on long-range reconnaissance, mostly due to the fact of the changes of the Cold War. However, by 1997, they got another name change from HJS to HJK, known as Herrensjägerkommando, or the Army Ranger Command. And this was only until about 2006 when they ended up kind of merging with the FSK. And during that time, they were known as the FSK/HJK, but however, by 2014, they pretty much just renamed themselves to get rid of all the confusion, as they were pretty much one of the two groups that made up the FSK. It's also been rumored that this group was the first special forces group in Pristina, Kosovo during the Kosovo War. They were also a part of Afghanistan, meaning they were a part of Operation Enduring Freedom, which was a joint program with the United States, Canada, and most NATO countries, which was pretty much a global war on terror that happened between 2001 to 2014. And of course, in their later years, the HJK had their headquarters located in Rena Lear, which is basically a military base where now even the FSK garrisons. As for the Herrensjägerkommando and the other names that it was affiliated with, getting a good idea of how many soldiers were in this group is also considered classified. Except, however, in 1984, it was reported that at least 38 men were operational along with help from the Special Boat and Air Service of Britain. And as for the FSK, during that time, it's been rumored and said that there was anywhere between 40 to 100 soldiers. However, nothing's really concrete, guys. By the way, guys, before I continue, I just want to say if you guys are liking this video and you want more stuff on the special forces or military content around Norway, be sure to hit that like button. And of course, feel free to check out our Norwegian playlist here that's on militaries. I think you guys will really like that. Feel free to check it out. I'll also put it at the end of this video if you guys want to continue. However, let's continue and learn about what is known as the Forsvaret Special Commando, or the FSK, also known as the Armed Forces Special Command in English, in a sense, I guess in a loose translation. To keep things not so confusing, the FSK also existed somewhere before the rename of the Army Ranger Command. And to give you a bit of backstory, in 1979, Norway decided that it really needed to step up its game when it came to safety and security, especially in the realm of anti-terror. With that, the Forsvaret Special Commando unit was brought into the picture in 1982 and began operating 2 years later in 1984. And one of the biggest contributors to having the FSK currently active is the fact that they need this unit to defend their oil rigs. And as a matter of fact, it's been a rather reoccurring issue when it came to the FSK, as in 1988 the FSK was pushed to be decommissioned. However, it was the oil industry and the armed forces that pushed for it to remain in the military budget. And as well, in 2007, the safety of the oil rigs within Norway became a great concern again. The reason for this is because of Norway's involvement in the War of Afghanistan. Pretty much during the War of Afghanistan, they did discover plans that had certain individuals planning to attack the oil rigs in Norway. And as a matter of fact, because of that, the FSK currently does routine drills with basically high-stress, accurate scenarios on board oil rigs. But today's world of the FSK is slightly different than it was in the year 2000s and before. This is because on January 1st of 2014, the Norwegian Special Operations Forces and the Marine Jaeger Commandos decided to merge together. As well, that was the same year that the HJK decided to rename itself to the FSK. And not to confuse everyone, but that's what I meant when the Frogmen were a part of the FSK now, as of 2014. And as for the HJK, from my understanding, is they really do a lot of the training within the FSK, and the FSK does more of the operational stuff. It's really rather confusing from my understanding. But as for training, the selection for these troops is always very, very intense. Of course, this isn't official, but this is from some of the articles that I've read about. To become a Special Forces operative, one has to finish their military service first before applying. And once you apply, there is a 3-day selection course in which one is tested for their physical and mental abilities. And this is crazy. I'm like, wow, I can't believe that people actually have to do this. Apparently, in 2 minutes, one person has to do 45 push-ups and then do 8 pull-ups, and then on top of that, do 50 sit-ups. I'm not even sure if that's actually 2 minutes per section, or whether or not that is just all of it has to be done in 2 minutes. Either way, it's nuts. On top of that, they also have to have a good swimming background and have to complete 400 meters in 11 minutes of swimming. On top of that, one has to march 30 kilometers in under 4 hours and 50 minutes while carrying all of their gear, which equals approximately 25 kilograms. And after completing all their pre-selection courses, you can go into the Special Forces, and the training for that takes about a year. However, also in Norway in 2014, after the merge of these units, they also introduced what is known as the first ever female Special Forces group, known as the Jäger Troop. However, for this group, it's just recently finished its testing phase. As a matter of fact, in 2014, it was only going to be possibly a year program, but because of its performance, they decided to extend it over the next couple of years. And by 2017, after reflecting on the group, they considered it to be a renowned success. And one of the major reasons why they decided to do an all-female group is because they actually needed females within the Special Forces to perform other tasks that males could not. On top of that, you also got to remember Norway was the first European country to allow conscription for both men and women at the same time. Of course, I should mention, in the first year, they had approximately 317 women apply, with only 88 making it in. And of that, only 20 of them actually completed the program. Of course, that might actually seem pretty low, but let's be honest, getting in the Special Forces, that's pretty high because getting in is tough. Of course, when it comes to the training, it's very similar to the male program. They also have to have a pre-selection course. They also have to do the 50 sit-ups, 8 pull-ups, and 40 to 45 push-ups in, I think, 2 minutes. Again, I'm not sure if it's individual or not. And of course, their swimming program is also the same, going 400 meters in 11 minutes. But however, one really interesting thing that I found out for the male and female program is they both pretty much do a recreated simulation of Operation Gunnerslide, which is that World War II operation I was telling you about. The downside to the all-female troop, however, is that in 2016, not a single one of these troops had deployed operationally yet. But of course, that might have changed because as of 2017, they did state it was a success, so I'm assuming at this point they are an operational force, and they are a force to be reckoned with. Of course, let's finish it off. Let's look at some of the weapons that these guys use. From my knowledge, they use the Canadian C8. I've also heard that they use the C7 from time to time. I'm not too sure. On top of that, they use the Heckler & Koch 416 and 417. They, of course, use MP5s and MP7s for close quarter combat. As well, for their snipers, they use the Heckler & Koch MSG-90, which is a very common sniper rifle that other special forces use from other countries around the world. On top of that, they use the L115A1 and the M82 Barrett rifle. And like most Scandinavian countries, they also use the FN Mini-Me and the FN MAG for machine guns. For example, there's the Alpha Group, which operates from the Federal Security Service, known as the FSB. There's also Airborne Special Forces under the VDV, and of course, SOBR 1 and 2. There's also the National Guard, and many more. So for this video, I'm going to talk about some of these forces. I might leave a few out. Of course, I'm also going to talk about the history of the Special Forces and how they came to be. And before I get into the whole video, if you guys are liking this content and you want more content on Special Forces, hit that like button. And if you're new, hit that subscribe button. Now, the common name for Special Forces within Russia is Spetsnaz, which is an abbreviation for Wojska Specjalnowo Nazначenia, basically meaning Special Military Purpose Units, roughly in translation. Now, as for history, this is where it gets very interesting and a little tough, because for some forces, they are rather modern. For example, the Special Operations Forces, known as the CCO, which I might also refer to as SOF. This particular unit falls under the Operational Forces Command, known as the KSO, and was recently formed in 2009. But the thing is, the term Special Forces and Spetsnaz and all that sort of stuff has existed long before this group was ever created and has a history from well before the KGB. Because if we look at the KGB was basically kind of like the state security, and they had special forces units within it. However, the KGB was actually formed from 4 other units. You have Cheka, which is basically the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission that was formed from the old Soviet Union police units, and that was created on December 5th, 1917. As well, there was also the NKVD, which was the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. Now, the the NKVD was also formed out of policing units, and they oversaw the country's prisons, labor camps, and were also a secret policing force that was formed in 1936. However, this group grew into what is known as the MVD, and I'm going to be using this term much throughout this video, because the MVD is the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which was created in 1946. As well, there was also the NKGB, which was a form of secret police and counterintelligence that was created on February 3rd, 1941. However, eventually this unit evolved into what is known as the Military State Security, known as the MGB, in 1946. However, the MGB was also classified as a secret policing force until about 1953. However, on March 13th of 1953, all these units were thrown in together and created the KGB, and this is where you get the birth of a lot of Spetsnaz. And I also want to mention, considering on this channel I talk a lot about special forces, Russia has a very different model of how the special forces came to be. Unlike most other countries where the special forces have evolved from the airborne troops, Russia's more or less came from these secret policing forces. However, I should also mention that Russia has a special forces group within the airborne, and on top of that, it's like the second largest airborne unit in the entire world. The entire airborne, or the paratroopers of Russia, are huge. And one of the reasons why this might not have evolved compared to other countries is because most of the airborne troopers during the Second World War were used more as foot soldiers, with only a handful ever being dropped anywhere during the Second World War. The Allies, however, used paratroopers for more specialized operations. But jumping back to the KGB, these guys were in charge of internal security, intelligence, and secret policing. For this group was present during quite a few operations internationally, such as the Soviet-Afghan War from 1979 to 1989, and in one particular operation known as Operation Storm-333, Russian forces, including the Spetsnaz at the time, seized the Tajbeg Palace and took out the Afghan president in 1979. Now, within the KGB at this time, there were two major Spetsnaz groups. There was the famous Alpha Group, as well as its sister group known as Spetsgrupa V or Spetsgrupa Vimpel. And these two units, believe it or not, are still active today. They survived the fall of the Soviet Union and are now under what is known as the FSB. Because for the KGB, it existed until the fall of the Soviet Union, in which it was replaced by what is known as the FSK, or the Federal Counterintelligence Service. And this group existed from 1991 until April 3rd of 1995, when it was renamed and replaced by what is now known as the FSB. However, let's keep in mind that not all special forces today fall under the FSB. And to identify the different special forces groups, in ground forces they usually wear the blue beret, and in the Navy special forces they wear black, where the National Guard wears maroon. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to break down these individual units and give a little bit of a summary and a little bit of history on them. That being said, if you guys want me to talk more about individual special forces units, because there is a lot of history around the Alpha Group, Vimpel, hit that like button and I will get right on it. On top of that, if you want to learn more about different military groups of Russia, be sure to hit this playlist right here, right in this card above, or you guys can wait till the end of this video, in which I'll have it at the end or in the description box below. Okay, let's get rolling. So let's talk about Spetsgrupa V, or Vimpel. These guys have been around since 1981 and are still active today, because in 1995, the FSB ended up gaining control over this group, and for their history, most of them came from training centers from what is known as the KUOS Training Center, which was eventually absorbed into the KGB Academy that has a history dating back to 1955. Overall, the size of this unit is really hard to say. They say there's probably around 1,000 of these soldiers that are trained in special forces operations, and the mastermind behind this whole group was Major General Ivanovich Drozdov. Also, when they merged in 1995 with the FSB, they moved heavily towards counter-terror and, of course, became nuclear safety enforcement. Moving right along, let's talk about the Alpha Group. Very similar, but definitely has a different history. Formed on July 28th, 1974, they were part of a Spetsnaz group with the KGB right off the bat. And, of course, this unit is known as the sister group to the Vimpel units. This group was created by the KGB chairman, Yuri Andropov. And as well, similar to most most special forces groups within Europe around that time, they were created in a direct response to the Munich massacre, which happened in 1972. Some people also believe that their creation was in response to the German group, the GSG-9, but let's be realistic, what happened in Munich was a major changing point for many countries around the world. Most of them saw that terror was becoming a big thing, and they said, well, we gotta create units that specialize in counter-terror. And although most are not quite sure about the size of this unit, in 1991 they estimated that there was maybe 500 soldiers. However, the group as of 2004 has shrunk down to approximately 250 to 300. And as for today, it's pretty much still a mystery. Now moving right along, let's talk about another group that most people forget simply because it's not really part of the army, it's part of the National Guard. This group is known as the SOBR, and it was formed on February 10th, 1992. Originally, they operated under the MVD, and since their introduction, they've had a crazy history, as in 2002, they were dissolved and put into the Regional Criminal Police Officers, known as the Special Police Unit, or OMSN. However, in 2007, it was estimated that there was about 5,000 of these soldiers part of this unit, and by April 5th of 2016, with the introduction of the new National Guard, they were thrown under that command. Overall, when it comes to the land forces of the Spetsnaz in Russia, they use a variety of equipment, mostly AKs from the AK-74 to the AK-12 and the AK-105. They also sometimes use HK-416s and M4A1s. For machine guns, they are most commonly seen with the PKM, and as for snipers, they use many different versions of the Dragunov, and of course the Accuracy International AWM. Lastly, let's talk about the Naval Special Forces because it's really fascinating. First of all, the Naval Infantry for Russia is one of the oldest infantry units that they have, having a history that dates back to its formation on November 16th, 1705. It was formed because of the actions that was happening during the Napoleonic War. But to go into the very specific group, let's talk about the Naval Spetsnaz. Now, these are a special forces group and are also known as the Frogmen of Russia, in which they say they have about 800 in their group and have been around since 1941. It's also interesting to know that the very first mention of a frogman in military history for Russia was during a war game at Vladivostok on October 22nd, 1938. Basically, what happened was during the war game, a bunch of scuba divers exited the submarine through a torpedo tube and sabotaged the naval base during the skirmish. I also want to mention that even women have had a major role in the special forces of Russia, but most specifically during the Second World War, although the Frogmen performed over 200 missions, it was a single female diver named Dina Koziva who performed a rescue operation in the Volga River anywhere between 1940 and 1941. As for the Frogmen of Russia, they use the APS underwater assault rifles and the SPP-1 underwater pistol, as well as Triton mini submarines and a lot of other equipment. Overall, when it comes to the special forces, they are widely appreciated for their hard work and effort, as on October 24th every single year, Russia has what is known as the Special Forces Day. And as well, when it comes to that new group that was created that I was talking about, known as the SOF, they have their very own Appreciation Day, which happens on February 27th. As well, when it comes to the SOF, as I mentioned, it is a rather new group being introduced into Russia in 2009. This happened when the country decided to reform the entire armed forces, and for them, they say they have approximately 2,000 operatives within this unit, and since then, they've been involved in many different operations around the world.